Welcome into Texans on Tap. I'm Brandon Strange alongside Josh Jordan and Charlie Palillo. Read their work on sportsmap.com and follow them on X at JoshJordan975 at Palillo. And that's going from right to left on your screen. Click like and subscribe to support us. Click the bell for notifications so you know when new content drops, especially when we are live after every game this season on YouTube. And if you prefer listening to your podcast, we're on all your favorite podcast apps like Apple and Spotify. Gents, we're finally here. We are around a week from the start of the season, likely one of the most anticipated seasons in the history of the Houston Texans franchise. The season opens against a familiar nemesis of the AFC South and the Indianapolis Colts. They split their season matchup last season, with the Texans getting the last laugh in the final regular season game to clinch Houston's first playoff berth since 2019. I want to start on defense because while both of these teams look different than they did last year, no bigger difference, I think, is Anthony Richardson behind center for the Colts. Texans only saw Richardson for a limited amount of time in that first half of their first matchup. But in that period, Richardson had more rushing yards on his 2 touchdown carries than Dameon Pierce had for the entire game. So, you combine that explosiveness with a target like Michael Pittman Jr., and you have a dangerous team in Indy. And even with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, Houston had its issues with Indy's RPO-heavy offense. How do you see Houston answering the challenge to contain Richardson in Week 1?
There is rightfully unbridled optimism among Texans fans for this season. But if you have any cause to be optimistic, if you root for a team going into the season, why not be pumped up? And the Texans with 2023 as a platform, D'Amico Ryan season 2, CJ Stroud season 2, a big-time offseason of acquisitions. But I'm a little wary of the sense that the trajectory arrow is just straight up. The Texans were barely better than the Colts last season, and they made draft choices and they made acquisitions also. But you hit upon the X factor, maybe in the entire AFC South for the season, Brandon, in Anthony Richardson. While being properly bullish on the Texans, I am bearish on Richardson. He's inexperienced. He wasn't all that experienced at college quarterback, and he lacked at Florida and in limited tastes. Right? He started 4 games last season, finished 1 of them before his season was over. Not an accurate thrower of the football. And you can coach things up to a certain extent. With experience, you can improve, and this is a very young player. But there's an element of being able to put the ball from point A to point B on time and with crisp accuracy that is an innate ability. To some extent, you have it or you don't. And Anthony Richardson absolutely is in the you have to prove it category. But as that run pass threat, he gave the Texans big headaches in game 1. Let's remember, the Colts scored more points than the Texans did last season. Right, the Colts won game 1 handily, and then week 18, the play-in division championship game, essentially, that was a 17-17 game in the fourth quarter, and the Texans had to make a stop at the end, helped by an awful pass to the flat by Minshew. But in the end, the results are what they are. Those results were the Texans were 10-7. The Colts were 9-8, having their planned starting quarterback for 4 of 17 games. Jonathan Taylor, an NFL rushing champion, not in the distant past. Well, contract situation and then an injury. He played in only 10 games for them last season. The Colts have a quality offensive line. Ryan Kelly goes to the Pro Bowl almost every season, their center. Quentin Nelson, their left guard, who actually, by all the evaluating, showed some decline last season, but he's a Pro Bowler 6 consecutive seasons. Biggest question about the Texans defense? I think safety and the interior of the defensive front. Behind Kelly and Nelson, and with Jonathan Taylor having a full training camp and being fully healthy, they're going to challenge the Texans, I think, a lot right through the heart of the defense. So in game 1 and in the broader picture, the Texans kind of in baseball, strength up the middle, catcher, second base, shortstop, center field is the core of your defense. With the Texans, if you can't stop the run, you have to commit a safety to the box. That's a real issue. And then the overall safety play, Jalen Petrie, not a good second season. Jimmy Ward, how healthy is he going to be? 33 years old. And then Kalen Bullock, how ready for prime time is he as a rookie third-round draft choice as a safety? But that the Texans defense should just straight up overpower the Colts offense, I don't see that. My X factor in the game is I'll take over a turnover and a half from Anthony Richardson.
Let's start with turnovers right there. We only have that one game to go on when Richardson played against the Texans last year. He only played a little over a quarter, but there are some things we can look at. In that game, the Texans had 0 sacks and 1 quarterback hit. That is not going to get it done. I mean, that's huge. Turnovers that we just talked about there. There was 1 turnover in that first game. It was C.J. Stroud fumbling, and that was it. So turnovers often, tell you what's going to happen in a game. So Texans didn't get any turnovers. They turned the ball over once. To be fair, you had a lot of backups on the O-line there, so maybe Stroud won't get as much pressure as he did last year. So that's a positive. Look at the red zone. Colts were 4 for 4 in the red zone in that game last year. That was a huge part of why they came out with the win. Looking at running backs, Jonathan Taylor, here's some stuff I was looking at. We know the Texans were surprisingly terrific against the run last season. They only allowed 4 carries to running backs last year that went for 20 or more yards, which is great. 2 of those were Taylor in week 18 against the Texans. So it's something to keep in mind right there. And then wide receivers, I think the safeties, the linebackers, they're going to do a lot to determine the outcome of this game because the Texans, they allowed the second fewest touchdowns to wide receivers last year. They're only behind the Jets. They only gave up 10. So maybe this isn't a Michael Pittman game. Maybe this is where they go back to the tight ends in the slot, throwing the ball to running backs. I think that's where the Texans, they're going to have to get some good safety play, good linebacker play to come out victorious in this game. So it's no easy task, especially when we looked at what we saw last year. So a lot of us said at the time, maybe D'Amico got a little outcoached in that game. And to be fair to D'Amico, his game plan went out pretty quick after Anthony Richardson was out of the game. But to be fair, Richardson had already put him up. So hopefully D'Amico will be a little prepared to counter what Shane Steichen's going to try and do in this matchup.
As we look at the Texans defense, not just for this game, but big picture, they should be beastly from the edges of the defensive line, right? Will Anderson didn't play at all, but didn't even make the injury report for week 1. So we'll presume, unless he starts gimping around or doesn't seem to have his full burst, that the ankle's fine, he's good to go. Danielle Hunter, their biggest offseason acquisition for me, bigger than Diggs, bigger than Mixon, because they have a dozen Jonathan Grenard sacks to replace. And Danielle Hunter is supposed to be the guy foremost in doing that. But that interior is a question mark. I think they have downgraded from what Rankins and Collins gave them. Folakasi is an okay plugger. Mario Edwards is a journeyman. Danico Autry will be absent for the first 6 games of the season. So I think teams are going to get after them. Inside, as a D'Amico Ryans guy, no problem with the acquisition of Azeez El-Shire. But Blake Cashman played very good football at middle linebacker for the Texans last season. And I am not deeming Pro Football Focus the be-all, end-all of player ratings, but Cashman graded out much higher than El-Shire, that rhymes, did last season. Texans without Christian Harris, to me, their most athletic linebacker, as one of their outside guys. So the D has a number of question marks. And the Colts, having seen the Texans twice, of course, it was game 2 last season in the playoff game, but a lot of film to go to work on. And how will Shane Steichen deploy Richardson with the already growing list, especially for a young player, of injury questions about him? How much do they want to expose him in the RPO? Designed rollouts where you can be prone to take a hit. So very interesting matchup. And, week 1, a division game, an important game. I mean, the Texans are road favorites, but they're favored by a field goal. So it's a very minor upset if the Colts win this game.
One thing to keep in mind is there is so much money coming in on the Texans. That's why this line is all the way up to 3 points. It's a crazy amount of people are on the Texans. So sometimes that can be a little concerning. That's that old Jim Rome thing. If everybody's on this one side, go the other way. So I don't see it that way, but it is something to keep an eye on. With so many people on the Texans, you wonder if it could flip-flop, if there's something that we're missing here.
As you want to lock in on Texans D for this matchup, Brandon, to amplify what we talked about, offensive line, Jonathan Taylor, Josh mentioned Michael Pittman, or maybe you mentioned Michael Pittman. Maybe you both mentioned Michael Pittman. A good, solid possession plus receiver, not a game breaker. Well, they drafted the guy they hope becomes their game breaker out of UT, Adonai Mitchell, Georgia, and in Texas. I mean, he's pedigreed at the highest level of college football, and he's the kind of guy that they're going to hope can get behind secondaries. Their Tank Dell, who puts the fear of God in his safety, who has to take more coverage. That side. Their slot guy, Josh Downs, probably not going to play. High ankle sprain. That would be a blow, but they have Alec Pierce. They have a little bit of depth there. Couple different tight ends. Again, as I said early on, the Colts scored more points than the Texans did last season, and that was with Gardner Minshew as their quarterback for most of the year. So if Anthony Richardson has a C.J. Stroud light type season, of what in some way you can think of as his rookie season, it would be his first full season as a starting quarterback, the Colts can be a dangerous team offensively and be a dangerous team in the AFC South.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think it starts with the Colts O-line because it's a good one. Jonathan Taylor skewered them for 188 yards in that finale, and their offense gained 227 total rushing yards. Feel like the difference in this game might be if they can contain the run more and rely on Richardson to pass. That might be, you talked, Charlie, about his accuracy issues. So maybe that's the way to get the one up on this team defensively is force Richardson to put the ball in the air more. But that's going to be a lot easier said than done. The Colts, when you look at their offensive line, they only allowed one sack in both of those games. It was in the second game. So even with Minshew behind the helm in that second game that they won, only got to the quarterback one time. So they're going to be very well protected. They create the seams for running, and Taylor's going to do his thing. So I do wonder how they prioritize containment versus trying to get after Richardson in the backfield. I think they'll try to play it safe, I think, to monitor him. Let's go ahead and switch over to offense now, because last year in their two matchups, it was basically C.J. Stroud and Nico Collins that gave Indy the most trouble. C.J. Stroud in the first game, 384 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, granted, that was them playing from behind for most of the game. Second game in Indy, 264 yards with 2 touchdowns for Stroud. Nico Collins, 146 yards with a touchdown in the first game, 195 yards with a touchdown in the second game. He averaged over 20 yards per catch over both of those games. But now Houston enters this matchup with Stephon Diggs. Do you think we'll see, Stroud replicate his previous success through the air against Indy?
This is the foaming at the mouth advantage the Texans have in this game. Their offensive passing game weaponry against the Colts secondary, which starting the season has to be graded as no better than shaky. And remember, week 18 last season, no Tank Dell. So you have Dell and Diggs joining Nico Collins. Colts secondary, young players with some talent. Juju Brents was a second-round pick. At safety, they have a couple of guys, second and third-year players. But no one that would challenge Derek Stingley Jr. for playing time. Kamari Lassiter, we'll see what he does as a rookie. But the Colts don't have a standout in their secondary. If one or two of their young guys blossom that way, Julian Blackmon is a safety who's held in pretty high regard. But can they cover all of the Texans' weapons over 60 minutes successfully? I think not, unless the Texans' offensive line has some sieve-like problems and the Colts really get after it. Indy's returning sack guy from a year ago, not returning. Right? Samson Ebukam blew out an Achilles early in training camp, 9.5 sacks, gone. The offset to that, Laiatu Latu, the Colts' first-round draft choice, they hope he's their Will Anderson. Right? Will Anderson was the 3rd pick in the draft and lived up to it, Defensive Rookie of the Year. Latu was the 15th pick in the draft. But remember, the draft was crazy this year. The run on quarterback, 6 in the top 12 picks. The 15th pick in the draft, the Colts got the guy they considered the best defensive player in the entire draft, right? No defensive player went in the first round until the Colts took Latu at 15. So how will they use him as an every down guy, or maybe more as a third down or second and long and then third down pass rushing specialist? And we talked about how the Texans' defensive interior might be vulnerable to that really good Colts offensive interior. I turn it inside out, same thing. Juice Scruggs is a question mark at center until he finds his footing in the league. Shaq Mason's okay at right guard. At left guard, Kenyon Green, hope for the best, right? Showed up in shape, looked like an NFL player, had a productive training camp, limited action in preseason, but he's another guy who in the NFL has accomplished not a damn thing. Well, the Colts have DeForest Buckner, who is a load at a defensive tackle spot for them. If the Texans can pass protect, they should be able to throw the ball against pretty much everyone. That certainly includes the Colts.
Yeah, I think on that Colts D-line, will the Texans be able to run the ball against them? We look. I think you hit on it earlier, Brandon. They rushed for 2 yards per carry in that first game against the Colts. So that's going to be a big problem. And then the other thing with the Colts is Grover Stewart is a good kind of run plugger defensive tackle for them. When he was in games last year, when he was healthy, they only allowed 3.4 yards per carry. When he was out, they allowed 4.6. Well, he's going to be available for this game. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge there for the Texans. And you hit on their secondary, Charlie. It's not the best. Their best corner is Kenny Moore. He's their nickel corner. So I think the Texans are going to have some opportunities to get the ball outside on their other corners and expose some of those guys. Nico Collins went bananas in both of these games last year. Tank Dell had a big game in the first game of the season against them. So I think that could be big. And as we were watching the Texans this preseason, like we've been questioning where are they going to line up. And when, 2 wide receiver sets, it was Diggs and Nico. 3 wide receiver sets, you see Tank come in, but we were seeing Diggs in the slot quite a bit. So it's interesting. Last year, Tank Dell, he only played 20% out of the slot in last year's game against the Colts in week 2. So, they're going to move these guys around. I think that's what it's going to be. But I think the best opportunities are going to be against those outside corners. But I kind of think all the Texans receivers put up some big numbers in this game. I think they're going to try and get Diggs really going. He's their new toy. I could see him having a big game right there. The Colts allowed the fewest receiving yards to wide receivers out of the slot last year, out of all the teams in the NFL, Kenny Moore, who I was talking about. So that's why I think that these outside routes are going to be where the Texans can make some hay. So that's kind of what I see for him on offense. CJ got sacked 6 times in that first game. So they're going to have to do a better job. But to be fair, there were a lot of backups on the O-line, like I mentioned. So hopefully we don't see CJ going down that many times in this contest.
Yeah, and that was week 1, rookie quarterback, all new coaching staff, a lot changed, of course. The sore thumb sticking out probably in that Colts secondary is Jalen Jones, who was a 7th-round pick out of A&M. I don't think that the Texans will specifically too much target one guy because that would be narrowing the receivers that you're targeting. I don't think every play is going to be, okay, this time, Nico Collins, you go line up and see if Jalen Jones is on you. That's where we're going. Whoever Jalen Jones is covering, it's not like put a defender in the pick and roll in the NBA and we're going to go after him every freaking time. It's just going to be fun to see. But bigger picture again, CJ Stroud, an incredible rookie season. 23 touchdown passes to just 5 interceptions. Can he replicate a near 5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio? If he can improve on it, well, the Texans are a team that should score 30 points per game fairly often this season. And this is the one other cautionary statistic that I want to throw in. Again, not wet blanketing it, just dealing with realistic numbers. Last 8 games of the regular season last season, the Texans scored 24 points once. Then, of course, they went off on Cleveland and then got punked offensively in the playoff game at Baltimore. So it's not as if the Texans offense, even with Stroud doing historic things as a rookie, was week in, week out, just lighting it up. They appear upgraded, absolutely, at wide receiver, presumably with Mixon at running back. So it circles back to that offensive line with health, with continuity, and with growth from Green and Scruggs especially. Maybe this can be a top 5 or 6 offense in the NFL. Because for all their amazing so-called skill position talent, it's not as if the Texans are ranked in the top 2 or 3 in skill position talent in the NFL. Right? There's talent all over this league, and the Texans would be in that second cut until or unless they can prove otherwise during the season, which holds so much promise.
Yeah, let's stay on that run game for a second because Houston only rushed for 52 yards in that loss in week 2, but they were still handing it off to Pierce for the majority of the carries there. But even after switching over to Singletary, when he's getting the bulk of the runs, only 60 yards on the ground in that second game. How do you guys see? You brought up Joe Mixon, Charlie. How do you see Joe Mixon possibly changing the fortunes of the Texans on the ground here? And how much do you guys think we'll see them use Pierce versus Akers as the backup?
Interesting that on the depth chart, which isn't some holy screed, Cam Akers was listed fourth string at running back ahead of this game. Excuse me? So we'll see how it plays out on Sunday. To me, he's the third down back, or at least the rotate him in back, because Joe Mixon has pass catching chops. It's not, it's third and long, they're going to throw the ball, get Mixon off the field. No, he's had a couple of 50 catch seasons there, but he's not going to play every snap, particularly not having played at all in the preseason. If Akers on Sunday is not ahead of Pierce, I mean, what the hell? Of everything we saw in 2023 and certainly through preseason 2024, how could Akers not be the number 2 guy? I also would expect the Texans to very, very rarely use a 2-back set, right? They cut Andrew Beck, who played 20% of the snaps last season. Great for British Brooks to make the team. He's probably the most fullbacky of the running backs that they kept, but I don't think they're going to line him up there much. I think it's going to be a lot of 3 wide and occasional 4 wide. So, it's one of those time-honored football cliches. You have to run the ball. You have to run the ball. You have to be balanced. No, not really. If you can pass protect and your passing attack is vaunted, so don't bang your head against the wall. If it turns out you're not a good running team, then pass, pass, pass. If you have the offensive line unit and a heady and elusive quarterback to not get the guy killed back there.
I think it's going to be a challenge to run the ball here. And we saw it in the preseason. There wasn't much going there for Dameon Pierce when he was in. And that's why I think you need Cam Akers. You need somebody that can make somebody miss. Joe Mixon at this point in his career, he's not super explosive anymore. He doesn't create a lot of missed tackles. He's a bruising guy. He can run through some dudes, but he's not going to break off an 80-yard run or anything like that. So, but that depth chart says a lot to me. I heard Nick Caserio on the Flagship just this week, and he was asked about Dameon Pierce, and he seemed to brush it all off, say all the right things about Pierce, talked about how he was going through a lot of personal stuff last year, and that they expect big things from him this season. So, if we take Caserio at his word, they see Dameon Pierce being that main guy to complement Mixon, even though we don't really see it. They must be seeing something good in practice because, Pierce didn't even dress for that last game. And now that we know what the depth chart looked like, they already had Pierce making the team. He didn't have to go out there and play. And Cam Akers was out there in the fourth quarter of that game. So as much as I'd like to see Cam Akers, I don't know if they're going to go to him until they kind of exhaust all their other options. So hopefully Mixon is that guy. He can catch some passes for you. It doesn't have to be all just, running the ball. One good thing with Mixon, though, is the Texans don't run as much shotgun where they hand off the ball like the Bengals did. So, if they're getting down and they're just straight running the ball to Mixon, not out of the shotgun, I think that's where he excels better. I think that's what the Texans want to do. A couple tight ends in there, some play action. I think we'll see some of that, but I don't have great hopes for the running game. But to Charlie's point, you just need enough of it. This needs to be an offense where C.J. Stroud has the ball in his hands.
We've all heard the term coach speak. There's also GM speak. And there's no reason for Nick Caserio to say anything other than optimistic words about any of the players before the season starts. But if they're expecting great things out of Dameon Pierce, they wouldn't have extended a near 30-year-old middle-of-the-pack starting running back, 3 years, $28 million, whatever the contract was there. So Dameon Pierce, if he is the number 2 guy as listed on the chart, he better validate that quickly, even if it's in limited dosage when he gets on the field, because we'll respect the personal problems. And personally, he's very highly respected, evidently, by all in that locker room. But NFL, not for long, performance-driven business. When you're in there, especially when you have a clear option in Akers, who played the pants off of Pierce in preseason, how long are you going to go playing Dameon Pierce?
Well, we did get that answer last year because they did eventually move away from him in favor of Singletary. All right, guys, give me your final score predictions and any final thoughts out the door.
All right, I will. See, the line is 3. I don't like that because picking a 3-point game then is pretty weenie-ish. So I will go Texans 24, Colts 20. But if it's Texans win easily or the Colts win the game, I'd say the Colts win the game. I think this is a much fairer fight than the perception is or seems to be around here. As an X factor, and in one game, we just never know. But Matt Gay, the Colts' pretty good kicker, dealing with a hernia, may not go. If he does not, undrafted rookie Spencer Schrader out of Notre Dame is their kicker. And I know that Kaime Fairbairn hasn't exactly been, a Rolex watch accurate, including in games at Indianapolis. But I'd still take the established league guy with the big leg over a guy kicking in an NFL game for the first time. So maybe there's an X factor, another one. While Mixon doesn't bring you much juice at running back, he does bring good hands, protection. Hasn't fumbled in 2 years, Joe Mixon. So if he puts it on the turf Sunday, no one come calling, you jinxed him, you jinxed him. Trust me, if I had the ability to jinx, I would use my powers in much different ways than causing a football player to fumble.
That's at Palillo, guys. At Palillo on X.
I'm going to be somewhat chalky with this pick. I'll go Texans 24, Colts 21. Go with that 3-point spread.
You're picking a push. I
am. I think this game's going to be closer than we think. And working out the kinks, they're going to be on the road. It's going to be loud. We're going to see Tunsil do his normal thing with the false starts and kind of kill some drives, probably. So, I'll go 24-21. We'll say Vegas got this pretty close to being right.
Yeah, I see it the same way. So, Charlie, just to recap, you said 24-20 Houston. Is that right? Josh, you go 24-21 Houston. I will go 27-24. I'm gonna do 3. I think it's a little higher scoring. Sorry, it's boring, but I do think they got it pretty close on here. So that was just instinctively before I even looked at the line. So I'm going to go with what I go with here. That's going to be it for this episode.
16 games in week 1, right? The open weeks don't kick in for a few weeks. One game of the 16 has a point spread 7 points or more. The Bengals are favored 8 over the Patriots. Every other game inside 7 points on the line.
Texans 1-2 road teams favored this week.
Charlie, by those numbers, should be an exciting season. And that's going to be it for this episode of Texans on Tap. Just a reminder, we'll be doing a live post-game reaction following this game on Sunday. So make sure you're subscribed to this channel on YouTube so you can join us for that. And until then, go Texans.